Welcome back to the Data Cloud Podcast, Dimitrije.
Thanks for having me today, Dana.
We're delighted to have you back. The last time you joined us, you shared Sanofi's journey around high quality and pervasive data as their strategic partner to improve your life science and healthcare business value lifecycle, as you put it, from molecule to market. Since then, just a few years, you've grown from being the head of data and AI to Sanofi's overall head of digital strategy and operations. This strikes me as paralleling the maturity among corporations in elevating data and AI from a separate responsibility or an adjunct supporter of lines of business to much more central and a strategic force for change and improvement. So how is your personal broadening of responsibility and your purview trace the overall role and power of AI and data as core agents of transformation at Sanofi?
It's a great question, Dana. I mean, overall here at Sanofi, we're looking to become the leading pharma in terms of being R&D driven, AI powered as a biopharma that drives improvements to patients' lives. And fundamentally, in my growth, what we've been looking at is how and where can we actually use digital technologies as a core strategic enabler across our full value stream. And so we've got a ton of colleagues that are making it happen, and we're working together through it. But fundamentally at Sanofi, we've made the public statement of being all in on AI. And we, at our core, believe that our AI-powered future is what's going to drive our company forward.
And have you seen that making data strategic and core has in fact helped compress that pharma life cycle from molecule to market? How have the efforts panned out?
I think the simplest way to think about it is that data is fundamentally a byproduct of our processes, our workflows that exist within the business. And so at Sanofi, as we've been undergoing our own modernization journey, modernization, simplification, standardization of our processes, by virtue of that, the data has been becoming more simple as well. A big portion of that and an understanding of why we needed to do that was when we started looking at some of the data and started seeing where you needed a bunch of different mappings across countries, across markets, across different functions. The data basically showed us where the business processes were disjointed. And so as we're now going through this journey, and especially with our upcoming launches in the coming years, we're going to have to double down on our processes being as streamlined and as simple as possible. And so data allows us to see into that. And the big element that's coming through is that the business process owners are actually seeing that managing the data that is a byproduct of their processes as a more core part of their day-to-day responsibility. So it's moving away from being sort of a back office function of something that where you're maintaining and managing data or databases to really being a core element of what each and every leader needs to do to be effective.
And I suppose under the best circumstances, this becomes a virtuous adoption process where you learn from the data where the holes are. By patching the holes, you get even better data that you can apply to more processes. And so have you seen that sort of a catalytic approach to an overall benefit in that sort of virtuous adoption pattern?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when people start seeing that data that's coming out of these processes is actually being useful, and not only is it being used by leadership to make decisions, but it's actually helping them in their day-to-day. I think that the core element is, how do we actually go from data to insights and then from insights to action? And what are those steps that we're going to take to allow people to take actions more effectively, make changes and actually pull through on things with the data? Often we think of it in this element of 80-20 rules and really focusing in on specific areas. But especially now as we're sort of looking at how we can use data to influence our future workforce and even tap into a virtual workforce, I'll say, then we're actually able to use all those resources that we have, the data that we have, to make more informed decisions and actions moving forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you want to bring these benefits to a broader audience internally, more people, democratization of the data, empowerment of more people to make better decisions. In doing that, however, you need to be thinking about guardrails and safeguards. And so how have you been maybe able to reach the balance between more exposure and more benefits, but also in a trusted and controlled and safe manner?
So it's a great question. At Sanofi, we have different ways that we look at our AI endeavors, right? We have what we call expert AI, we have what we call snackable AI, and we have a lot of programs that are leveraging generative AI. Snackable AI, and you sort of smiled when I said it, is one of those areas where each and every Sanofian is meant to have at the tips of their fingers access to data and insights, and often those insights are generated by AI to allow them to make decisions in their everyday lives. So we have a number of modules in one of our applications that we've partnered with an organization to create named Play. And the whole concept of it is that that's at everyone's fingertips. Now, our expert AIs are actually deployed in specific niche areas across the value chain. And so you'll have some very specific elements for, let's say, hit selection in large molecule research, or you'll have others that are focused on yield improvement in manufacturing and supply chain. But those are focused in there. And lastly, we have the components that I've talked about with generative AI, doing lots around the creation of documents, creation of content for marketing purposes, but also looking at how we can leverage some large language models also in the drug discovery process. Underpinning all of that is Sanofi's sort of approach on responsible AI, which we've been calling RAISE, which is about responsible AI at Sanofi for everyone. And the concept is that we actually want not only our AI specialists, but our experts and users that exist across the value chain, and those generalists, like everyone at Sanofi, to really understand what AI is and how they can be in the loop in making sorts of decisions. So it's something that's been taken quite seriously here at Sanofi, and it's meant to actually take a risk-based approach of saying, well, truly, where are we actually using this? How did we used to do this before? Because there's an element of accuracy that's always the question. But if I'm making a binary decision within an internal function that isn't regulated and it's for an internal employee decision, perhaps that's lower risk versus looking at something that's within a regulated space or touches patients where we really need to make sure that every single element of that has higher degrees of control. So we've kind of based our controls across the life cycle, whether they're governance controls, whether they're technical controls, training controls, and we've basically gone and said, what's a baseline element that needs to exist everywhere versus what is going to be higher risk and then focused on those specific use cases.
Yeah, that's interesting. A fit for purpose approach to trust. I haven't heard too many organizations detail it in that way, but that sounds very appropriate. All right, for some of those of our audience who are new and that didn't hear your first podcast, tell us a little bit about Sanofi. You've alluded to it a bit, life sciences and pharma, but tell us, it's a lot more than that. Tell us about the full breadth and scope of what Sanofi does.
Absolutely. So Sanofi, for those of you who don't know, is the world's biggest vaccine manufacturer, but we're much more than that. We focus on general medicines, think of insulin and medicines of that nature, on vaccines, and last but not least, in specialty care. And we're really focused in the space of immunology, and we really want to deep dive and double click into that field of immunoscience. Now, what we have a strong conviction of is that in order to be R&D driven, you have to be AI powered. And so that's been at our forefront, really, is looking at how we can disrupt the space by virtue of using AI all across our value chain, and really thinking about those areas that you can completely reinvent a process and think about it in a different way versus how you had in the past. So in our journey, we've been modernizing the company in of itself and really going and being very particular about specific therapeutic areas and specific areas in our portfolio that we want to focus on and doubling down in R&D. But now we're really looking at then how do we use AI as the enabler across all of our functions.
Yeah, it sounds like a constant recurring transformation, which is one way to stay ahead of the game in almost any business. All right, tell us about your role in organization, with the title Global Head of Digital Strategy and Operations. That could be a lot. That could take in a lot. Tell us about what you're doing and what your organization consists of within the overall company.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very long title, but I'll put it this way. If at Sanofi we're looking to focus in on really being AI powered, we're asking ourselves from a digital perspective, what are all those areas that we actually want to double down in, where we think that we can leapfrog ahead of the competition by making a difference. Once we have a sense of that, we start looking at what strategic partnerships do we actually want to build, where are we actually, and how are we going to work with those organizations to bring what they have and their know-how to the table, to really accelerate it forward. By virtue of having those two elements, my organization then looks at kind of all the different components that make up our digital portfolio, whether that be our spend, whether that be all the team members that we have and all the partners that we work with, and figure out how to govern and optimize the allocation of that. And so the function is pretty broad, and it sort of ends off with the elements around operations and making sure that we have strong vendor and contract management. And so it's really looking at how can use digital to really optimize its own operations. And so what our vision has been is actually looking at all the different workflows that exist within Sanofi, figuring out how we can simplify those workflows and finding the right ways to make sure that we're using data and AI to drive the right optimizations through those workflows. And so my strong conviction is that fundamentally for us as an organization to move forward and to make the largest leap ahead, we need to look back at all those processes and say, if we were a company that started today with a zero-based approach, how would we go about designing this? And that's what we're bringing to the table.
Yeah, that's an awfully powerful concept, and we finally have the tools at the costs that we can accomplish a lot of this. And so let's segue a bit to the trends of the day, the tools that are helping you in unprecedented ways. So I'm thinking about AI agents. I'm thinking about natural language search and querying, perhaps groups and constellations of agents. Are these things that you're jazzed about? And how are you putting some of the newer concepts in AI to the task of this big endeavor that you're undertaking around processes?
It's a great question. I mean, I was thrilled to be on the podcast a couple of years ago, and we've gone a long way in terms of setting the foundations that we needed from a platform perspective and from a data perspective, because ultimately data is what powers AI. So as much as everyone wants to talk about the agents in the future, it's about having those strong foundations. Now, once you've got those, because your data is representative of your processes, you can start finding those areas where you can leverage that data to completely reimagine the way that something is done. And it can be often starting with something as simple as, for us, we started with an area of looking at, okay, how can we optimize the software licenses that we have within the organization? And, if you have access to certain software that you're not leveraging, how do we just simply use logs to say, hey, Dana, you haven't used this in a while. Let's take it back and let's actually create some savings. And what we've been able to generate is upwards of 10 million euros worth of savings within a year in that space. What that allows us to do then is open up different sorts of conversations where, now that we're no longer, let's say, sending a survey annually to say, Dana, do you use this? And thinking about how we can use data to drive that forward, that's when you can start deploying agents in different spots. And all those arbitrary thresholds that we used to set in the past, where no one will look at something unless it's over a certain amount of dollars spent, as an example, that's where you can deploy your virtual workforce. So the way that we're really thinking about it is we're saying, what are all those job descriptions and what are the specific areas that we actually believe the certain core responsibilities can be executed by agents? And so how do you actually design, coach, mentor that virtual workforce with a very specific objective and a mechanism to use memory? So use the feedback that you give it, like you would with any team member, to improve itself. So we've been blessed in having great partners like Snowflake. One of the great platforms that we've been using on top of Snowflake is a platform named Elementum. And the nice part about Elementum is that your data never leaves Snowflake. So for us, it's all that work that you put into all the foundational efforts. Now you can turn it into workflows that are powered by AI in just a matter of weeks. And so the whole concept is moving from this idea, the foundations, then into MVPs that you can then scale out rather quickly. That's what's giving us a leg up, because the pace of change and how much has changed in 2 years since I last spoke to you folks is incredible. And so we're getting generations worth of change in very short periods of time, which means that we need to really make sure that our investments are very calculated because it allows you to sort of continue to grow and move ahead.
A lot of what we've seen, and that includes at Snowflake, is the use of agents to enable the use of AI, and they can build on each other. But you mentioned the virtual workforce, and I'm wondering how, as you develop the virtual workforce, you can use agents and perhaps innovation and interactions to make sure that there's synchronicity, communication, and collaboration between your actual workforce and your virtual workforce. Any insights into how you make the virtual workforce an accompaniment to your existing human resources?
I think it's quite simple. If you look at the majority of organizations, the majority of organizations, often when you sort of evaluate satisfaction scores of employees and things like that, the parts that are always sort of underlying is the amount of information that's being thrown at us is causing a lot of burnout, elements related to mental well-being that needs to be monitored. And so the idea behind this virtual workforce is saying, look, the amount of work that we get in as an organization is never linear. It'll go up, it'll go down, there's seasonality to it. But fundamentally, tackling the problems that are extremely well-defined, repetitive, and we have standardized processes for, those are components where the virtual workforce can take a first stab at it. And the more feedback that we get, the more accurate it's going to get. And so for us, we've tackled certain problems like actually being able to identify what is or isn't being purchased that's up to a digital standard, because the more that we actually understand where do people disagree, so that we can have a good conversation on how do we make this better rather than agree to disagree and go in opposite directions, allows us to sort of raise all boats. So from my perspective, I don't think it's an AI or a human sort of question. I think it's definitely an element of a human with AI will always beat an AI or any human alone. And so it's how do we actually skill up our organizations to use these elements that are at their fingertips to work more effectively and free up for some of those creative elements and elements of emotional connection and decisions that make us humans and allow us to sort of be creative in the ways that we are.
Yeah, it sounds like an empowerment sort of a trend, and then being able to identify where people can agree, and then finding the data that you can apply to that question and perhaps answer it in the best way possible. That's very powerful too. Okay, so you mentioned a little bit earlier about the sharing of data across organizational boundaries, and you actually brought that up in your last podcast. And I'd love to hear more about how you've been able to accomplish that, because that's a difficult thing to do, is being able to share enough data in the right format and then with the right protections outside of your company. But in doing so, you can have ecosystems and supply chains operating on more of the same foundation with the same goals and the same data, one view of the truth, if you will. So tell us a little bit about how sharing data was worked across organizational boundaries, and perhaps what you need to do with the data in order to make it extensible like that.
It's a great question. I think overall, like many other organizations, we've started creating some of those data sharing partnerships with many different commercial entities, and we're looking at basically how can we use certain approaches to protect the privacy of individuals while being able to train models. And so federated learning is a great example of that. I'd say that we're at a point in time now, though, where the technology sort of enables us to do a lot of these elements and is pretty safe. It's been proven in so many different industries. Where we need to do a better job as leaders and cross organizations is find those problems that are worth solving, where, again, the data in of itself, holding it to ourselves, isn't necessarily a competitive advantage one against the other, and where, in our case in particular, it's at the benefit of patients to share that data across organizations. Let's say toxicology data as an example, because it ultimately impacts the safety of products that are being built across organizations, right? And so those are spots where we need to do more. The technology is actually there. Now it's an element of people and understanding how to establish those structures and making sure that the right risk tolerance is there in place. And so I think that's a spot that we still have to move on. the data models being completely standardized and all that sort of stuff where, we could debate how to pronounce certain words like we do in many different parts of the world. It's no different when you speak to people that work with data and how they
Sure.
want to see certain fields and how they want it to be modeled. But with the tech that we have out there now, you can even agree to disagree on some of these things, and you can have and use the technology to remap it. So, it's a little bit of my intent and call to action to find more and more of those areas where private organizations, public organizations, we can all find the right spots to share the data without necessarily moving the data, and making sure that, we're very specific on what can be seen, what can't be seen, how it can be used, all those sorts of things to execute and solve for problems that honestly could never be solved for before.
Yeah, it strikes me that sharing data becomes sort of a new way of binding organizations together with dependence and mutual benefits by doing so. We've seen this in many other levels of transactions, but the data being sort of a new currency, I think can bring even more to that value add of organizations working together and collaborating. So that's very cool. I looked at some of the presentations that you've signed up to do, and one of the words that jumped out at me was shadow digital. And I'm wondering, as an operations executive and a strategy executive, what is shadow digital and what's your solution to preventing it or reducing it?
I think that digital is now being embedded everywhere in the business. And so any business that isn't digitally enabled is lagging behind. Now, the pace at which that's been changing versus the ability for traditional IT organizations to grow and then become digital organizations and have more strategic mandates, there's been a lag there. And so while shadow digital can be looked at as a negative element, it's simply saying that people needed to execute a certain business function at a certain point in time, and they were buying assets to do so. They're trying to do the right thing to execute on their business function. Now, as we're growing as organizations and really adopting more and more of that, at some point we have to say, well, what is a standard that we want to set and hold ourselves to, so that that foundational work, right? I'm sure you've all been a part of re-kickoffs and redeployments of various data governance programs or migrations to new data foundations. And fundamentally, when you're in the business, whether it's platform A or platform B, you're looking for some performance and you're looking for some business outcomes. And so it's a question of how do we actually align on a standard and then hold ourselves to that. So the way that we've looked at it is really having our colleagues in the business and our colleagues in digital sit down, and for certain areas where we're enabling business outcomes, right? So let's say for patient experience, as an example, what are our standards that we have pre-RX and post-RX, right? What do we actually think our patient find solution is? What do we think our patient support platform looks like? What do we think that what's our patient companion application? So that not every organization or not every time a business unit goes after something, they have to redefine it from scratch. They can actually tap into that. And so what we've been able to do is find those spots that folks are deviating and actually inform them of what the standard is. And guess what? Chances are when you shift to the standard, simple economies of scale, there will be savings to be had there. But it's a bit of a flip in terms of the question itself, rather than saying you're doing something wrong, to say, well, how do we actually inform you and how do we agree on what the right thing is and continue to mature that? Because in a lot of areas, people are simply finding a more niche solution that's more bespoke for them. And that, I'll say, local perfection can cause global chaos. And so it's a balancing act to be had.
Sure. Yeah. Many benefits to standardization when you can and when it's appropriate. Are you using internally AI and agents to find those pockets of where you might want to standardize better? Is that something that the automation and power of AI is helping you identify?
Absolutely. I mean, it was sort of what I was alluding to a little bit earlier. It's a spot where if you think about any sort of certain purchase requisition that comes through, if you're able to in real time scan through it and say, Dana, you put in a purchase requisition, you're based in the US, you put in a purchase requisition through, and it goes and checks and says, hey, what the solution that you're using for your website hosting platform is off base, and we actually use this other platform. And it lets you know, Dana, this is the actual platform. This is who you can speak to learn more about it, and this is why it'll help you. Well, chances are you'll be willing to move and shift to that platform. But the whole agentic element behind it is this is all happening in the background, and the LLM is asking itself some questions until the objective function is completed on, what cost center is this coming from? Is this potentially digital in nature or is it not? And how much is it digital in nature, right? Because it's never black and white. Do we actually have a standard for this? Is that standard mature? If it isn't within the standard, what might be the rationale to it? And once it actually answers all those different sorts of questions, it's not built on pure logic. It's built on a set of objectives that you're orchestrating it against. It feeds that insight back and goes directly back into the system of record, the application that one is working in, right? So as an end user, all that you see is you put in your PR, you hit submit, and after 5 minutes, you get a comment that comes in and says, hey, this is off base for this and this reason. And it starts forcing the interaction with the people who are the owners of these platforms. So it's a totally different way to think about it. But example of an agentic flow where ultimately knowing what the objective is, being very clear on it, having that orchestration with an LLM on its own. And guess what? You might go and say, hey, that wasn't actually a website hosting platform. That's actually just content that we've built for the website. Well, you provide that feedback, and that now serves as memory to the agent in of itself. So the same way, we had an interesting instance where people were going through some of the feedbacks and they were saying, hey, there's a misclassification here. And the feedback that the team member provided to that misclassification was repeatedly typing DG into the comment box. And so I submitted it back, and guess what? The AI didn't get any better. And when I'd spoken to them, I'd asked them, well, if your team member misclassified something they're new, they didn't know, and your feedback to that team member was DG, DG, DG repeatedly, I don't think that team member would actually know what they did wrong and do it any better next time. And so that's often how we have to think about it with AI as well. It's like, what does good truly look like? Because it's easy to say, that's not quite it to anything. And a lot of these elements aren't black and white. So what is the differentiator? Because that's what'll help your agent get smarter over time.
Sure. It sounds great to have potentially a guardian angel on your shoulder that says, hey, by the way, you can do this work much smarter than harder, or here's what you may want to consider doing the next time. That would be something I would certainly enjoy in my job. But that gets me to the next point of what we talked about, the digital and the virtual workforce, but culture and motivation still plays a big role. We're all human, and we have behaviors, and we have inputs and outputs that are not always predictable. So have you been able to work with culture and data services and modernization efforts in a way that is sticky, that people gravitate to? And I guess that's a long way of asking of how do you get the people to support this?
I think that you've got to hit it from so many different facets, right? Like we created this app for us with snackable AI because it was meant to put AI at the fingertips of every single team member within the organization. And the concept behind it is it sort of shows that if you're doing things the right way in the right systems, it can actually substantively help you in, it's one of those spots where you're going to have to prove it so people see. And so our AI budget predictions are often a lot better than when we do them manually. And we'll share the exact percentages, but for those of you that know, but the other elements that are super important about this are just simply associated to education. Last year, we ran a campaign here at Sanofi called the I in AI month, meaning that there's an I, a human, who's actually always partnered up with AI. And so over 15,000 Sanofians participated in various training, webinars, different elements to learn about everything from the foundations that make data, because you'll have some brave souls that come to you and say, you're asking me to be a data owner, but I actually don't know what that means. Can you actually elaborate on that and give me some concrete examples? Like, I want to be a good Samaritan, I need help. And so going through the cultural transformation, it's actually having people understand a lot of that. Additionally, all of our executives at the company have undergone this Drive digital training that's all about how to actually think about, disrupt, design, and create these value theorems of where you can apply digital more broadly, and often there's an AI lens to it. So it's really broad, from making sure that there's reasons for adoption, challenging the status quo, educating your teams and giving them the resources they need to be successful, educating your executives, and then it's a drumbeat that's consistent that allows that to land home. And so for us, it's important for us. That's why we're saying we're all in on AI. But if you say something like that, you've really got to walk the talk and follow it through.
Right. And a little bit more detail around some of the things you've done around your AI Center of Excellence, and you have something called an AI Brain Trust. How have those been developed and matured in such a way that it aids and abets this overall pervasive AI goal that you've set?
Absolutely. I mean, look, we service the organization across the board in terms of developing AI solutions. And so we've got a number of different locations in the world where we do that. I'm located here in Toronto, and we've got an AI Center of Excellence here in Canada. We also have a number of what we call digital accelerators across the world. And the concept behind them is to really give them a meaty problem, work in a completely agile environment. And they're small teams that don't necessarily work on all the different legacy elements that an organization of our size and our history have, but are very focused on the future. And that allows us to sort of tackle problems in ways that we've never thought of tackling them before, and ask ourselves, why not? So when we last spoke, our AI Center of Excellence here was half the size it is today. And it's continued to grow with AI being at the forefront of what our organization does. But I'd say AI is being embedded everywhere within Sanofi, and it's really causing a large scale transformation. It's not just about the digital team powering this, it's everyone at Sanofi is all in on AI.
Great. I wonder if we have, before we close out, a couple of specific examples that you could point to, Dimitrije, that manifests the most interesting value here. Are there some examples of things that have happened in your organization that you think exemplify the best of AI and culture and transformation coming together?
When we look at where we've been most successful in applying AI, it's really about being able to quantify and tangibly say, what is the outcome you were able to drive? I mean, as a pharmaceutical organization, we always look at the standard of care that exists for patients today, and for new pharmaceutical products and drugs that are coming up, how are we different than the standard of care? And so that's how we have to think about AI as well. And so for us, there's a number of areas that we've been able to inject AI and completely change the way that certain processes are done. So you've got certain large language models that we've published, and you can check them out online, like CodeOnBERT, that's associated to mRNA sequencing. You've got certain areas where we've dug into elements like integrative clinical data. So really being able to find new indications that could be serviced by therapeutics that we've got today. So meeting unmet patient needs with products that are already proven to be safe and that are already out there in the marketplace. But there's a variety of areas where we're saying, how can you actually rethink this problem where you've been able to only tackle a small smidge of it with all the data that you've collected? So my call to action to a lot of my peers is sort of, don't think about this in the sense of, really, let me build all the foundations, and once everything is clean and perfect, we're going to get going. You're going to start connecting dots across the board, and you have to really look at what your workflows look like today and how quickly you can start generating that minimum viable product, because people have to feel it, they have to see it, they have to be there to really show how it's influencing the way that they work on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's simplifying yield, whether it's creating documents for clinical summary reports, whether it's creating documents for product quality reviews, whether it's developing a next best action or being able to, compare two therapeutics head to head and see, based on patient criteria, which one might be better suited for them. We've got a variety of spots where it's been injected. And I think the fact that people see those live examples is incredible. I'll leave you kind of with one parting thought. We created an AI agent here at Sanofi named Concierge. And the idea is that everyone has their own personalized experience with Concierge, and you're able to load your own documents into it. You're able to ask your own questions to it, and you're able to actually close the loop and execute actions through it. And so seeing those things and having this product be built, and huge kudos to the team that's built it, because they were able to launch it in the fall, and they have around 70,000 active users, not far off from the number of employees that we've got. So it sort of tells you and shows you how deeply entrenched AI is at Sanofi.
Yeah, no, that sounds very impressive, and I think gives other organizations the idea that perhaps making it more pervasive faster than later is in everyone's best interest. So I appreciate the sharing of that. Well, I think that'll close us out for today. Thank you so much to our latest Data Cloud podcast guest, Dimitrije Jankovic. He's the Global Head of Digital Strategy and Operations at Sanofi. Thank you again for sharing your expertise, thoughts, and experience.
Thank you, Dana, and hope to see you again soon.
You bet.